Welcome to DU Digimon.
Hello and welcome to DU Digimon, and welcome to another video, a different kind of video though. Today we are looking at a tier list, specifically the tier list that was voted on for the next lot of Jank Tank format, which is the BT16 EX6 format. If you like this sort of content, our deck profiles, matches, etc., make sure to like, subscribe and ding that notification bell so you're not missing out on any of the latest content. Now let's get into our tier list. So this was specifically for the voting of the Jank Tank stuff that we do on the channel. I'll put a playlist to you in the description if you wanted to check that out. And essentially, Jank Tank is where we're only allowed to play decks which fall into the Jank tier, the absolute bottom tier of decks. And the way we do that is we all vote on what is going to be going into that Jank tier. And we put that vote onto the channel. We put links onto the channel, onto the Jank Tank videos, onto the Discord. Normally, I forgot to do it for this one. But normally we put it on our Discord channel as well. But this time around we actually had 39 participants in the vote this time around. I don't know if people voted on literally every single deck in this. There's a lot of decks, but 39 participants is huge. That is more than triple what we had in the last vote. So that is kind of insane, frankly, and really cool. But we'll get into the tier list. It kind of doubles up as our specifically Jank Tank tier list, so that we're doing some Jank Tank stuff, because with regionals and everything coming up, we are not actually doing a Jank Tank in May. Obviously at the time of recording we're almost at the end of May now, but with the next Jank Tank we're doing, Jank Tank 5, will be sometime in June. But what is really cool is this doubles up as a little bit of a discussion into the tier list stuff going forward for the BT16 and EX6 format. So going into it, what's kind of cool as well is you can see this is the total results. I can also click onto my votes as well. These were my votes if you wanted to know how I voted as well. But I may have had some biases to Mirage Galgamon there. But we're mainly discussing what is generally going on with people's thought processes. So, first of all, into Tier 1, which will absolutely not making its appearance in Jank Tank, but will be giving us nightmares for the next couple of months. The first deck in Tier 1 is, of course, Numemon. And Numemon is the absolute Cinderella story. I love what Numemon has become. Going from being completely bottom tier jank goodness to defining BT15, and still kicking ass and taking names in BT16 as well. It does a phenomenal job going forward into BT16. It still goes really wide. That there's still a lot of decks that have problems with it. There is some stuff that will be able to deal with it a lot more easily. For example, the kind of bunny stuff and the yellow armor stuff, all because of Rapidmon X, will be able to deal with Numemon a little bit more easily. But for the most part, Numemon is still very much going to be a top threat going forward. 100% of the votes, and this is what I mean as well, there's like 15 people voted on this one, but we had 39 participants, which is very odd. But I don't know, I don't mind. I just think it's cool. We still get people voting on it all the same. But Numemon absolutely going to be a big threat going forward still. Next is the boogeyman himself, Magnamon X, the armor deck. Obviously he does belong in yellow armor as well, but Magnamon is, he's a scary fella. He's got the armor purge, he's got the blocker, he makes himself bigger, he gives himself protection from literally everything, and he can trigger that quite easily. He's just super scary. The armor's become mega consistent. I mean, even now in the end of BT15, just the inclusion of the Magnamon from ST17 has done wonders for the deck. Like, armor's just gone from being rogue to being, on its way into absolute greatness, and Magnamon X and the other kind of BT16 support it will be receiving is the icing on that cake. It's going to be super spooky going forward to face Magnemon, and almost every deck will be in some way teching to take this guy down. Next in tier 1 is Leviamon, which I found pretty interesting actually. So Leviamon, the reason I kind of found it interesting is if you look at the voting down here in tier 1, tier 1.5, I actually can't remember if I've hidden my mouse or not, so I'm spinning it around to tier 1 and tier 1.5, not knowing if you guys can see what I'm doing. But if you look at the voter split there, just ahead on tier 1. And it is still going to be very much the best purple deck in the format for a little while, until probably EX6 properly comes out. And obviously this is an EX6 format, but saying that, you know, what I think could potentially be better than it is down lower on the tier list, so maybe I don't know anything. But Leviamon's still going to be super scary. It's got ways of getting around certain protection effects. Not all of them. I think it will struggle a little bit against Magnemon X, but against certain things, like for example Greymon, it could bypass that protection effect by the fact that it deletes twice with one effect. You know, it's just a superbly strong and aggressive purple deck, you know, which still will be quite scary to go up against going forward, but maybe not as scary as it was in BT15. Next, we've got Red Hybrid, which has fallen very highly into tier 1.5. Red Hybrid has surprised everyone with how... Oh, hang on. This isn't Red Hybrid. Sorry. That's Red Hybrid. We'll come back to what actually was on screen in just a minute because I'm talking about Red Hybrid. So I'm going to keep talking about Red Hybrid. We'll come back to you, Shine. Sorry. Anyways, Red Hybrid I think will be interesting going forward. I think in the interim between now and BT18, at the time of recording, we've had our first kind of BT18 cards revealed with the new triple color Emperor Greymon, for example, which looks super cool. You know. But Red Hybrid's going to be very interesting. I don't think it's going to be as good as it was in BT15, you know, just because there are going to be things that can deal with it a lot more easily. But I still think it's going to put in some good work. It'll still be one of the better red decks in the format, I think, going forward. Speaking of red decks, back to Shine Greymon. Sorry, Shine, I'm just blind apparently. But Shine Greymon is still going to be great. I was watching, I think it was Risu the Squirrel, do one of his regional breakdowns the other day, and Shine Greymon has a funny way of always doing really good, specifically I think in the Oceania regionals and stuff like that, specifically does really well there, and you know, it's still been really good since BT13. It's still a great deck. It still has a lot of aggression. You know, you see people experimenting a lot more with it. You know, like for example, I know there was Mario's Gaming World did his, it's not Shine Greymon, let's be honest, but it's Marcus kind of yellow hybrid stuff, which was really cool to see. You know, still quite a lot of fluidity with certain cards from the deck, and I still think we'll see it around going into BT16 and beyond. Next is Fenrir Lugamon, which is going to go through an absolute metamorphosis come BT17, but for now is kind of still here in 1.5, and still doing some cool things. It does get some new support in BT16. I think you get the new Solugamon and Helugamon, I think. I could be a little bit wrong, but we'll have to see. I don't even know if those cards actually do much for the deck, really. It's mainly going to be the changes from BT17 that's going to really liven up Fenrir Lugamon and make it a super spooky thing to go up against. It still can be super spooky. It can still OTK. It can still do stuff like that. It just takes a lot of setup, a lot of thinking. If it doesn't get the right order to things, it kind of, I've found going up against Fenrir Lugamon, it can kind of flounder. But if with the right pilot, with the right setup, it's still absolutely incredible and will blow people away if they're not ready for it. Next is D Brigade. Now D Brigade is interesting because we are getting some new support in BT16 with the new Chaosmon, and some other little bits as well. It's still going to be very swarmy. It's still going to be very kind of scary to go up against. Slightly better now, I would say, with the BT16 stuff, and I think it will be a very good option go forward. I mean, we find down at DU that D Brigade in general is quite good for newer players, or at least it was. It's a little bit more thinky now, but it's still got to do really cool and do some great things. Next is one of my favourite decks on the tier list, which is Mirage Galgamon. This is currently my main meta build at the moment. It's really, really good. Now we're going to the regionals in BT15 format instead of BT16 format. This is Birmingham that we will be attending, which was meant to be one of the first BT16 regionals potentially in the world. But now, because of the delays in the UK, it will be the BT15 format, and it's a different video, that issue, but it's happened before, and it will probably happen again, and it's extraordinarily frustrating as a UK player. You guys in the US, you do not know how good you've got it, honestly. But back to Mirage Galgamon. Mirage, I think, still has a place to potentially be a tier 1 deck. With the new kind of jamming card it gets and stuff like that, it's got more of a list. I mean, I put it in tier 1. I could be biased, but I put it in tier 1. I still think it's going to be really good. It's going to struggle a little bit against stuff like Magnamon X. It can potentially get bigger than Magnamon X, with the burst mode. And with certain kind of tech options. So, for example, you could put I think it's ST7 Demi Vmon, as well as also some of the BT13 stuff that gives kind of DP boosts. But I think that's going to be interesting going forward to kind of find that balance. At the moment, and going into BT16, it's still going to be one of those decks that could just all of a sudden you think you're fine and then you're not. It will blitz people away if you're not careful. Next is Black War Greymon X. Now, this is interesting, it being in tier 1.5. I mean, if you look here, the vote is dead even on tier 1.5 and tier 2. So really, we should be calling it like tier 1.75, I guess. But Black War Greymon X is in a weird place. I think it, and we'll get to. I'll talk about War Greymon as well. War Greymon's in tier 2. It just makes sense to talk about these two together because they can be the same deck if you're going kind of the toolbox version. But Black War Greymon specifically, the issue with the Black War Greymon side of things is they are often quite expensive to go into. If you are not digivolving on top of a Black War Greymon, they cost 5. Black War Greymon X and Gaiamon cost 5 to go into. Which is really quite costly. Obviously, you've got some ways of mitigating that. You've got some ways of gaining memory earlier in the turn. You've got training cards, that sort of thing. But if you're in a situation where you've got your stack and you don't have those things, you've not got that memory gain, you've not got that, they can be really expensive. And in general, Greymon is going to struggle a bit with speed and consistency going forward. There's a reason why now in Japan, them quite heavily into BT17, you see some Greymon still about, but it's very low down in terms of wins, and is really not seeing much play. It saddens me so much because Greymon is my deck. I love Greymon. Greymon is my favourite Digimon line. Black War Greymon is my favourite Digimon. War Greymon is a close second. The first deck I built in the game, which I mentioned in the player profile I did the other day, which is a thing I want to make a bit more regular on the channel. It was the first deck I ever built in Digimon, and I want to keep playing it, and I want to keep experimenting with it and seeing how far we can take it. But as we get deeper and deeper down into the next kind of few core sets, we're going to find Greymon getting more and more issues going forward. For now, tier 1.75 we'll call it for Black War Greymon X and War Greymon, although War Greymon was voted more in tier 2, but let's just call them tier 1.75 accumulatively. They're going to struggle. Next is Fanglongmon. So this will, I think, see a little bit of a lead off now that we've got stuff like Magnamon X in the format. Obviously, it still does a fantastic job against Numemon. The fact that you can do a blanket 15,000 DP minus on fucking everything is incredible. It's really, really good. But it will struggle in the matchup against Magnamon X because Magnamon X will be, you're going to try and minus 15k me? Good luck. You know, sorry, I think something just popped up there. But you know, I think it'll still do well. It'll still surprise us. It's, you know, it's still got some good potency. It's surprisingly quick for a deck that is, you know, turn one is just, I'm going to play something for 7. You know, it's still going to do some really cool things, and I think we'll be in for a treat with it. Next is Rapidmon X. So, really, I probably should have got a separate card image for Rapidmon X and Mega Gargomon, because Mega Gargomon is more the bunnies side of it. Rapidmon X is seeing more play in stuff like Yellow Armor. Obviously, it's, you know, it's kind of in both, but we'll do a talk about both in this slot. So either way, bunnies is super strong. You know, it can do a lot of great shenanigans. Mega Gargomon Ace is a degenerate ace card, really, really strong. Suspends stuff, stops things from digivolving, stops things from unsuspending. It's just really gross. Rapidmon X, on the other hand, is, you know, going to be, as I kind of mentioned earlier when talking about Numemon, is a really good way of dealing with wide boards, because it just minuses, you know, so much stuff on the board. I believe it's whenever something. Yeah, when an opponent's Digimon. Oh no, hang on. What do you do? While Rapidmon X or X antibody something. I can't remember. I can't read that. I need to get my eyes tested. But it's going to be really good whether you're playing the Yellow Armor variant or bunnies. It's going to do a fantastic job going forward. Next is Ogudomon. So this is a deck that I'm actually super terrified of. Anything that can trash 7 is something you should be afraid of. You know, it will have consistency issues. You know, it's that kind of Royal Knight style. You need to kind of have certain pieces. You need to make sure you've got a certain stack in things. You know, certain things going on. But just like Royal Knights, once it's got that set up, there's nothing you can do. Absolutely nothing you can do. I'm pretty sure it deletes stuff off the board as well. Yeah, it's going to be just super duper terrifying. You know, but yeah, that's all I really have to say for it. Ogudomon is coming for us all. Tier 1.5 continues with Bloomlordmon. So Bloomlord is, you know, not necessarily the best green deck now. You could argue Bunnies has that title, but Bloomlord still puts in massive work. It still goes really wide. It still does a lot of really cool things. And the fact is, it's not really changed. It's not changed its game plan, really. It's just, we play green, good stuff. We play plant, good stuff. We suspend, we pierce, we do all the checks. And that's literally all we're looking to do with Bloomlord. It's still going to be super strong. It's going to be interesting to see how strong. You know, people are clearly still thinking it's 1.5. You know, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see if Bloomlord does the business going forward. Next is Garurumon, and Garurumon was another one with a very split vote. People thinking tier 1.5 or tier 2, and I'm kind of in agreement in the kind of the tier 1.75 category. I think I may have even. Did I vote Battle Garurumon in tier 2? No, I put it in tier 1.5. I think looking back at my votes, I'd probably lean more towards tier 2, because really, even after the BT15 stuff, obviously ban list being a thing, but what has Metal Garurumon done? I don't know if it's topped at all. I can't remember to the best of my knowledge if in any regionals since BT15 that Metal Garurumon has topped, and I don't think that will change going into BT16 as well. Sorry, just smacking my mic, because of the fact it's, you know, it's single stack decks. They put all of their eggs in one basket, and that's the issue. It's going to struggle with bouncing Magna X. It's going to struggle with dealing with Numemon. Yeah, I don't know if it really belongs in tier 1.5. I would probably, like I say, I'd probably lean more towards tier 2. I'll be honest. But you know, it'd be interesting. Then go back to green decks. It's Tyrant Kabuterimon. Tyrant Kabuterimon is going to be exactly what he says on the tin. He's going to be a bit of a tyrant. He is going to be massive. He's going to be immune to stuff. He's going to be bouncing stuff away. It's going to be a really, really cool deck going forward. And I think in general, kind of Tyrant Kabuterimon, it's going to be... It was kind of slept on in Japan, I think, but I think over here, loads of people are going to play it. You know, I know a few people down at the... You know, down in the group who are going to be wanting to play it, and beyond, there definitely will be loads looking to play it. Next, going into tier 2, we've got Royal Knights. I mean, what can you really say about Royal Knights that hasn't been said before? It just gets all its pieces. If it gets all its pieces, it wins. If it doesn't, it loses. Enough said. You know, I think solid tier 2. Beelzemon as well. Beelzemon is always going to be incredibly good if it gets all of its pieces. If it does all of its trashing and memory gain, and, you know, oh god, if I ever have to hear anyone say trash gain 1, I will have a aneurysm. It's so infuriating when that goes off. If it doesn't go off, it kind of does nothing. You know, and also for the person who requested a Beelzemon profile on the channel, I can't remember your name off the top of my head. We're working on it. We filmed it, and then we realised there was an issue with with what we'd filmed. So we're sorting it out, and we'll kind of get that to you as soon as we can. But yeah, Beelzemon I think is yeah, it'll do okay. Next is kind of the Angels yellow vaccine stuff, so going from kind of the armor side to more of the Angels stuff. Tier 2 I think is definitely where this belongs now. It kind of won't be able to do as many of its tricks against kind of stuff like Magnamon X and Numamon. And I'll be honest, if you're looking to play yellow vaccine, just play yellow armor. It does the job, but a lot better. You know, I think that's probably the way to go. Next is Jesmon in tier 2. So Jesmon is going to be one of those decks which is going to be, I think, seeing a lot of tier 2 roguish kind of play. It could technically be a top card in Magnamon X in armor, because it can digivolve on top of a Royal Knight, and I believe Magnamon X is still classed as a Royal Knight. So that's kind of scary. You know, suddenly 18k completely immune security attack blocking piercing juggernaut that has blitz as well. That will be spooky. But as a deck itself, we'll see. You know, we'll definitely see that. Next is Leomon. Leomon, I think, is kind of a gatekeeper deck. If you can beat Leomon, you are in the top ranks. If you can't beat Leomon, you're kind of poo. You know, I think Leomon really surprised us in EX4 with how good it will be. I think it's getting a new Mad Leomon at some point. It's getting a new promo Leomon X as well. Can't for the life of me remember if that's in BT16 or EX6. It might be BT17, I can't remember. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that does going forward. Next is Blue Flare, and Blue Flare was absolutely the bane of everyone's existence in the team bar Charles, because Charles was the guy who mained it. Blue Flare will always do its job really well, and it stands the test of time. It does a really good job just doing its thing and doing it really well. I think it can surprise you, but the fact is we've not seen it top in a long time, so I think it being in tier 2 is a sensible choice. I don't think it would go anywhere kind of beyond that, but you know, you never know. There might be a good enough pilot out there makes Blue Flare, and there you go. Next is Shadow Serafi, which although this is Jank Tank and SecCon is actually banned from Jank Tank, so there might be a couple of decks on here that we would talk about that are actually banned from Jank Tank because of Jank Tank's rulings. So how many times I say Jank Tank, just, you know, give me a nickel. But we can basically class this as SecCon. I think SecCon will see a little bit of a fall off despite the World Tournament win a couple of months. Was it a couple of months ago? It might have been a couple of months ago. but it will still do things. There's always somewhere lurking in the darkness a Setcon player. There always is. You never know where they're going to be. They could be right next to you, and you wouldn't know. But I think it'll do all right. Next is Dark Masters slash. We might as well call this Mega Zoo. Which, if we are calling it Mega Zoo, I would make an argument that it's a 1.5er. Alex plays in our group. He plays the Dark Masters Mega Zoo deck, and it's a lot scarier than you think it is. And will be even scarier with stuff like Vicomon Ace and Grand Quagamon Ace. So actually, it's one of those decks that's it's not necessarily it's not a tribal deck. It's a style of deck, and I think it will do surprisingly well still going forward. So I'd potentially argue tier 1.5, but tier 2 I'd say is fair enough. Next is, I think this is kind of the Digipolice stuff from BT15. This technically could fall under the D-Brigade stuff, and I feel like if you were going to play this, you might as well just play the D-Brigade stuff. Not really much else to say. I'm pretty sure it's suspend stuff. It's got Alliance. I don't actually remember anyone playing it. I think maybe Charles played it for a week and then didn't play it any further than that from the team, but Next is Hunters, and Hunters now has a Digimon in the game that can bypass its removal effect to place something under a tamer. Magnamon X can get around that with its lingering effect, but for everything else, they're still going to struggle with that. I think Hunters will require some support in the future to be kind of properly relevant again, and it will kind of fall more descendingly into stuff like Jank Tier. I think eventually. For now, it's still tier 2. It still does its job and still does it well. We'll just have to kind of see what it's going to do. Next is Venus One, which you could argue this is kind of Setcon, yellow stuff, yellow good stuff. Venus One, I think, has been a little thorn in people's side for a little while. Does a really good job, especially in combination with stuff like Mitamamon and stuff like that, and just yellow stuff in general. I think, to be fair, I'm gonna ping pong this. I'm gonna, Venus One, Mitamamon, they kind of fall under the same vein, I would probably say. You sometimes see them in the same deck. You sometimes see one being used over the other. I personally use Mitamamon just because I like the fact it can, just shit out another Digimon. But other people prefer Venus One because it stops people from doing stuff. It's also more expensive to go into. Didn't realise it's 4 cost. Yeah, 4 cost, 3 cost, yeah. Whilst I'm here, I might as well talk about Ketoris One as well. It's a rogue tier deck. If you're looking at it just on its own, I think it still has some utility in Yellow Vaccine, but we'll ultimately see less and less kind of play. I use it in my current Yellow Vaccine build, and I think it's really good in that, but I think, going forward, that Ketoris One out of these 3 cards is going to be the one that's going to fall off the most. These 2 will still see play because of the fact they stop people from killing you. Anyways, sorry we dipped our toes into Rogue. Tier 2 again. Rose 1X. If you're playing Rose 1X, why aren't you playing Bloomlord? I'll wait for an answer. No, I'm joking, but I think that's a true enough statement with this. It does some different things, of course. It suspends tamers and spends, it does those kind of things. But no, I genuinely think if you were going to play it, just to play Bloomlord, and it's another one of those ones with a split kind of voter poll. Some people putting tier 2, some people rogue tier, and again, it's just been defaulted to the upper tier. We'll skip over Wargreymon because we talked about that already. We now go into Anubismon. Anubismon, I would have really liked for it to be kind of in Jank tier because of a certain deck that I play, but it's kind of in tier 2 still. It does still do things despite the limit to Anubismon, but essentially it's still going to do some really, really cool things, playing out Digimon, deleting things, drawing things, gaining memory, all this sort of stuff. It's still a very potent deck for what it's worth, despite that limitation, but it's not really going to go any further than tier 2, unfortunately. Next is Lilith, which is Millith, of course. It likes to mill stuff. It likes to do that sort of stuff. I think tier 2 is fine for this. you know, it kind of just plays to its own beat. It's not really caring about what other decks are doing. It doesn't care about security. It doesn't care about its own security. It only cares about making the other deck smaller than itself. You know, so as long as it does that, it wins. If it doesn't, it dies. Next is Machine Dramon. Machine Dramon, I think, is one of those decks that kind of always comfortably sits around the tier 2 rogue tier area. Again, another split vote on this one. You know, depending on how you tech it, it probably leans more one way than the other. You know, some people prefer to do Marvin, some people prefer to do Analog, some people prefer to do it kind of more Megazoo style. You know, it'll always be a fan favourite. We all love our big metal boy. But unfortunately, you know, he is kind of going to sit here in tier 2. It will be interesting to see what the new Chaos Dramon in I want to say BT17, will do for the deck. But ultimately, I think it's not really going to change much. Next is a BT16 deck for the first time since tier 1.5. Is Shakuamon. Shakuamon, I think, is very interesting that it's in tier 2, actually. Because I think... I can't even really remember what the deck does. It DNAs and does black and yellow stuff. That's all I can really remember. That's kind of embarrassing that I don't remember what it does. But, you know, I think it'll be good. I think it'll be fun. It probably does D-Digivolve stuff. I know the Slash Angemon has Barrier and can get Blocker as a kind of inheritable. It also has Partition, which also Imperial Dramon has as well. And the only reason Imperial Dramon is not on here is because Imperial Dramon was actually banned from Jank Tank because it won the first Jank Tank tournament. But Imperial Dramon's going to be a really spooky deck. I think that tier 1, tier 1.5, I think it'll fall into those categories. Obviously, this is kind of a video blending. Smacking my mic again. Blending kind of BT16 and EX6 thoughts with a Jank Tank video. So it will be slightly longer as well. I might try and timestamp it if you want to go through the general BT16 EX6 discussion and the Jank Tank stuff, but we'll see. But yeah, Shakuamon I think will do okay. Going into Rogue tier, Grace Nova is still here. So Grace Nova is an interesting one because it's getting some new consistency tools with the new Ogumon and the Galgamon as well. So I think given the right setup, it will smash. Wrong setup, Rogue tier for sure. Next is Ukomon, which is kind of changing slightly with the new big Uko and of course the infamous BT16 Ukomon with searching. I think Ukomon is going to be one of those decks that can take people by surprise still, but if you want to play swarmy decks, play Numamon. You know, I would say it's going to do okay though. Next is kind of the source stripping Vikemon Zudomon stuff, still represented here by a picture of Zudomon. I think Rogue tier is a perfect place for this stuff. Source stripping is really good, and there are some decks that really care about having their sources stripped. There are other decks that don't really care. I think it will surprise people. It can still do some really cool things. I mean, for example, it might be able to do a good job against armor if it manages to get the right stuff out from underneath Magnemon X before its effect goes off. You know, so that's an interesting theory, but I think we'll have to wait and see to see how good this does. In the same kind of vein, I would say Birds with the new Bird stuff, which is also not pictured because Birds and Marsbon were fused together into one deck for Jank Tank 3, and they are banned from the format. You know, so I think that'll be interesting to see. You know, going forward as well. But I'd say Birds is Rogue tier right alongside Zudo here. Next is Leopardmon X. So Leopardmon is kind of just doing green good stuff, frankly. There are better green decks, but it does still do some interesting, tricky stuff all of its own. It can, you know, give the entire board blocker. It can return stuff to hand. It can spam stuff out quite frequently. I still think it will surprise you how good Leopardmon X can be. I know I need to look at my build for it, but we'll have to just wait and see just how good this one will actually be. Next is Dark Knightmon. Dark Knightmon has always had a kind of strong place in Rogue tier, and Rogue tier it will stay. Not much to say about it really. It will de-digivolve stuff. It will block stuff. It won't necessarily do much else. Next is Mastomon, which kind of surprised me that Mastomon's here, because with EX6 on, being counted as part of this tier list, I think that's a surprising one to kind of see in Rogue tier still. I think the issue is it's still got trouble kind of getting its pieces, still doing the DNA, setting all of that up. But, it might surprise us. You never know. We'll have to kind of wait and see and see how it goes. Next in the Rogue tier is Amphimon. Amphimon is another deck that could just really surprise you all of a sudden. It can unsuspend loads. It protects itself. It source strips. It does loads of really cool stuff. In fact, I'm pretty sure there was some Amphimon tops in a very recent regionals. Obviously, that's BT15 format and not BT16 format, which this tier list is applying to. But yeah, Amphimon I think is going to do some really cool stuff going forward. So we'll have to see. I've said that a lot. We'll have to see. I'm going to try and not say that. Amphimon, good. But not too good. Next is Gallantmon. Speaking of good but not too good, Gallantmon will see its true return to form in BT17 with the new Crimson Mode Ace. For now, it does have Raid, and Raid is good against Magnamon X. It does have a good matchup against Numamon. It's why we've had some surprising Gallantmon tops in regionals and stuff like that in BT15. And I think it still will surprise people. It's one of those decks that has always been better than people give it credit for. And I know both Alex and Sam are two Gallantmon players, and AJ as well. We've got 3 Gallantmon players. It's very late. But Gallantmon will surprise you, and I think going into BT17 will be properly spooky. For now, going into BT16 EX6, not so much. Next is Gamamon. It's another deck that's kind of so. Once it's got its pieces going, it will smash. It'll do great. But it's getting there. Gamamon has a surprising amount of stuff to it, but it seems slightly not convoluted, but just not quite potent enough, I suppose. But who knows? Might get some surprising Gamamon tops. Next is Alphamon. So Alphamon, again, I think it came like joint. It came second or third in a regional recently. Alphamon will, with the right pilot, always do really well. But it has to be the right pilot. It has to be the right setup, which is why I think it's ended up in Rogue tier. Technically, does get new support from the Dorogora stuff, which I realise is not on this tier list. Reminds me, actually, if there's anything you don't see on this tier list, one of the things with Jank Tank is that something that is not in the tier list will be automatically classed as Jank, and Dorogoramon is not Jank by any means necessary. So I think that deck is going to be quite surprisingly spooky with the collision mechanic. One of the decks that will be able to deal with stuff like Magnamon X a lot better than we would think. So Alphamon technically can use that support as well. So you never know, it could be better than you think. But yeah, I forgot to put Dorogoramon on this tier list, but let me know in the comments if there are any decks you do not see in this. Almost had a very naughty slip of the tongue there. But why did I bring that to attention? But anyways, yeah, I think Anubis Alphamon. Oh, it's so late, guys. This is professionalism at its finest. I'll just keep talking until I'm done. But all right, next is Mervamon. Yeah, Mervamon is Rogue tier, I'd say. There's not too much I can talk about Mervamon. It was kind of spooky in BT11. Not really now. Ragnarlord is next. So I think there was a couple of EX6 things down here in Rogue tier, and actually I think one in Jank tier as well. Ragnarlordmon will be interesting because the actual ace is pretty cool. I mean, this is the first level 7 ace in the game, which will be incredibly spooky to go up against. But again, Ragnarlordmon needs its pieces. It needs to have the right things at the right time so it can do its DNA and so it can do all that sort of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe we're wrong on this and it's not Rogue tier, but I think Rogue tier is probably still where it belongs. Next is I'm gonna say it's Japengmon. I know it's a Chinese word. I want to experiment with this deck. I was playing a lot of blue Jumbo Gamemon, and I saw this stuff and thought, this could work. This could be really, really cool. Turtles and fish, lizard, bird things. But it's gonna. Well, I think it will do some cool things. It's not really done any topping stuff in Japan, but I think plenty of people will experiment with this and just see what it can do. Next is Allforce. Allforce will do some cool things. It will do some unsuspending things. It will do some OTK things. However, if you want to do any of those things and you want to do them good, play Mirage Galgamon. Come on now. Next is Blue Hybrid. Blue Hybrid, I think, surprisingly, didn't do as well as it did after the Tommies went to 4. But in BT17, it'll shit on everything. It's been doing really well in Japan, and it's still one of the best decks now. It's doing really, really good. But for now, Rogue Tier is right where Tommy belongs. Next is Belphemon. Belphemon has some interesting protection. It can do some really big damage. It can be really spooky. But again, it's another deck that's got issues with consistency and issues with kind of getting its pieces in the right time. So yeah, I think it kind of belongs here in Rogue Tier. I think you're not really going to make an argument for it to go any higher than that. Next is Sylphimon, which technically is the Valkyremon stuff. Valkyremon as a card is seeing a lot of play in Numamon and stuff like that, and just yellow stuff in general. But yeah, Rogue Tier's down here. I think it does some deletion stuff. It does some cool things with partition. Yeah. And now, finally, at the 43rd minute, like I said, I'll timestamp it. We get into Jank Tier, and this is the real meat and potatoes of our Jank Tank tournament. So these are all of the legal decks in Jank Tank, as well as some unpictured stuff, if you can bring that to my attention. Wink. But this is, Jank Tank is obviously the only tournament that matters. Just saying. But this is all the decks which are pictured, which are legal. We have Tyrannomon, one of my favourite decks. Always going to have issues. We need a Tyrannomon X. We need something that searches Tyrannomons. Please, Bandai, if you're listening, help me. But Tyrannomon can do some cool things. I've been experimenting recently with putting a couple of red options in it, and may very well bring that out on a profile sometime soon. Let me know if you want to see that. But we'll see how that goes. Next, you've got Titamon. This is the deck that I actually use Anubismon stuff in, and it's a deck that can surprisingly just take things. It can OTK. It can OTK. Doesn't always, but it can. Next is Digimon, another deck I play. Digimon is the first deck along here to have a 100% pure Jank rating, which, given its performance in the last Jank Tank, is absolutely apt. It does some cool stuff. I actually really want to experiment with the EX7 Nature Spirit stuff and Digimon. I think that could be really cool. But whether or not it'll be any good, we don't know. It can also play out the black Nature Spirit stuff as well. So you could play a green-black Nature Spirits deck with a Digimon top. I think that'd be really interesting. Definitely want to try that out. We've got Galacticmon next. Galacticmon. Someone voted tier 2 for Galacticmon. What is wrong with you, sir? I think Galacticmon will have some good stuff going on once we get into... I can't remember if it gets support in EX7, but it will be getting support at some point. It does some really cool stuff still. It trashes stuff. It gets huge. Enough said. Next, we've got Chessmon, and Chessmon I friggin' love when it's played alongside Jumbo Gamemon. It does lots of really cool spamming stuff. It replaces its bodies when it loses them. It costs 1 on any egg. Jank tier. Enough said. Speaking of Jumbo, I freaking love Jumbo, whether you're playing in blue or whether you're playing in black base. I'm currently playing Jumbo Gamemon black base, and I think it's going to be my deck for Jank Tank because I'm friggin' loving it right now. It's so fun. You can play it with Chessmon stuff, or you could go generic 2-color stuff, which I've done, which has actually been working really well. It's very fun. You know, it's quite slow, but he's a giant mechanic turtle boy, so it's just on theme. Next is Plutomon. Plutomon. Someone put Plutomon in Rogue tier. Given how I've seen this deck work, I don't agree with those people that put this in Rogue tier. But you do you. Plutomon will do itself, and it will do itself poorly. Next, we've got technically a Sakuyamon, but we've got Kazuhamon here, getting supported BT17. So will be surprisingly good, I think, come then. But for now, it's too reliant on getting its option cards in the right order. It's too reliant on having one tamer, just having Rika and no other tamer that's properly relevant to it. You know, it's just, yeah, it's got those kind of issues. It's cool. It will always be cool. But until BT17, not doing the business. So we are in jank. Speaking of not doing the business until BT17, Kazuchimon. Kazuchimon had no support since BT7. 10 sets later, it's making a comeback in BT17, only to be underwhelmed and undermined by a big old doggo boy who nicks his sword. Yeah, Kazuchimon's jank for sure. Who put this in Rogue tier? Own up. Who are these people putting these decks in Rogue tier? Own up, guys. Next is... Sorry, I don't know if you can see me highlighting this here. Someone misclicked. Certainly. Shivamon is not 1.5. You could argue that Shivamon is usable in Tyrant, so Shiva is Tyrant. But if you're just doing Shivamon shenanigans, I mean, we are getting the ace at some point, but it's a jank tier. I'm not going to argue it. Speaking of jank tier, Medieval Gallantmon. I put this card image in this tier list, knowing that full well Medieval Gallantmon is not a deck. There is no Medieval Gallantmon. You could say, you know, shit SecCon, maybe. You're just playing Security Digimon to be on theme. You could attempt to have this be a top in a normal Gallantmon deck. I wouldn't. Just don't do it. It's not going to work. Next is Dino-Rexmon, which I know Alex is looking to bring Dino-Rexmon into jank at some point. He wants to do it as a green going into red deck. You know, not necessarily a red going into green. But Dino-Rex does some cool things. It's unfortunately the BT9 one hit, which is pictured here, is somewhat contradictory with the BT14 one. Yes, because this one deletes stuff with 6,000 DP or less when is when they're suspended, and the BT14 one stops 6,000 DP or less Digimon being played. Someone didn't think that through, did they, guys? Next is Grand Drachmon. I have no comments on this. I don't know what it does. And that's all I'm going to say. Next is Lord Nightmon. And Lord Nightmon, actually, now, people putting this in Rogue tier, I get it. Because this can play out Valkyrymon Ace. which is really cool. And there's a few different YouTubers who I've been watching who have made me aware of that, and I was like, huh, I guess it can, can't it? It can do that. So I think that surprisingly could make this a big contender for the Jank Tank going forward, because of shenanigans like that. I would still agree with the majority here. It is a Jank tier deck, but for the 3 people that put it into Rogue tier, I can understand you. I cannot understand tier 1.5 Shivamon. Next is Zed Garurumon, which honestly, this is a deck along with, and I'll talk about it now, Victory Greymon. Where is he? There he is. These two are a bit of a contentious state in Jank Tank, because we do have a ruling that says that your deck can't be borrowing too much from meta-relevant decks. And if you're making Victory Greymon, surely you're just making a Greymon deck with a shit top line. And if we're making Zed Garurumon, you're just making a Garurumon deck with a shit top line. So it's all about whether or not the top of the deck defines the deck as a whole, or if the whole deck, rookies and all, is what makes a deck the deck. Is the deck... I keep slapping my microphone, sorry guys. Is the deck just the deck because of what it does to end the game, or is it the deck because of the way its mechanics work consistently throughout a match? I'd like to see your thoughts on that. Let us know. Next is Rasenmon, which again is another deck I put in here, which I was like, I know it does things. It's a purple and yellow deck and it does things. I don't actually know what it does. But it's here in Jank Tank. Whoever put it in Rogue tier, I'm going to assume you're wrong, because I don't know what Rasenmon does. I joined the game in BT9 going on BT10, and Rasenmon is before my time. Black Hybrid. Yeah, the Wise One stuff. It's cool. I like to use Laplace's Demon from it to force people to attack you, which is really, really good. But otherwise, you know, in the same vein as like Jumbo Gamemon, you're not winning games blocking things. You know, so yeah, I think Jank tier is a perfectly good place for this. Same with Purple Hybrid, though I'm less knowledgeable about Purple Hybrid. I think they have a lot of retaliation stuff just based on Kaiser Leomon, but other than that, I don't really know what they do, I'll be honest. Next is Ravemon. Now, Ravemon is a deck that was really fun in EX4 and BT13. But has really fallen off, and the fact that it's a Jank tier is really fun. There were still some people that were a bit torn on it. Some people saying tier 2, some tier 1.5. I think it's one of the better decks that's made its way into the Jank tier, and we'll be interested to see if we have anyone playing that going forward. Next is Green Hybrid. Again, hybrid stuff. I don't really know what Green Hybrid does. I'm assuming it does green good stuff, it suspends stuff, and it pierces stuff, and it's cheap. Other than that, I don't really know, but it's in Jank. Grey Knightsmon. This this is absolutely Jank tier. Grey Knightsmon does nothing. It's inconsistent. It's weird because it's got half a blue deck and half a black deck slapped together. It was shit when it came out in EX4, and it is shit now. And I have an alt art of it in my binder that is going nowhere for the foreseeable future, unless anyone wants it. Mercurymon is next. So Mercurymon is the forebearer of Fortitude, and like the forebearer of any of the keywords, it is bad. All it does is Fortitude related stuff. It will be interesting to see if anyone plays this in Jank Tank, but obviously does not belong anywhere else in the meta. So yeah. Next is Devimon. This will be getting some interesting support in EX6, but it's still in Jank tier. I think it's one of the... I know it did get some in Rogue tier. This will be an interesting deck, kind of going forward with the EX6 stuff. But yeah, I'd agree Jank Tank is where this belongs. Next is Bagra. Bagra is another deck that has got some really interesting tricks to it, but ultimately falls flat because of how much it needs to do and then doesn't do. I think Beardy Dan is looking to play Bagramon in the next Jank Tank, so we'll find out how it does. It might be amazing in Jank Tank. Elsewhere, no. Next is Ogubond, which I would definitely like to try and bring back to Jank Tank. I haven't played it in Jank Tank since the first one, and will be interesting going forward, especially with the new Ace card that we're getting in, I believe, BT17. But for now, Jank Tank is absolutely where it belongs. Jank Tier is where it belongs. It does some cool stuff, but it's all old and underpowered. Next, we're skipping over Victory Greymon onto four great dragons. I can't count. You got the Goldramon X in BT16. That will do some things, I'm sure. Otherwise, it's going to be super janky. Alex Blessing was looking to build this at some point for Jank Tank, and he kind of lost his head over it because it's just everything he does when building it turned to shit. So, you know, but saying that, that's perfect for Jank Tier. So, Alex, if you're not playing Dino Rex, I expect to see you playing Goldramon, my boy. Next is Chaos Gallant. So Chaos Gallantmon is Gallantmon's kind of crap little brother, and Jank Tier is absolutely where it belongs. Any level 6 that has to summon itself from the trash to do its stuff is cool. But you know, I think it will do some really cool things in Jank Tier, but elsewhere, yeah, it's rubbish, let's be honest. Next is Examon twice. I've accidentally put it in here twice, and interesting to see, yeah, slightly different votes on it as well, which is really funny. But yeah, Examon is in Jank Tier for sure. It just needs too many things to get going, and just doesn't do it enough. Same with Alter S, but this is a little bit more explosive. I went up against this in the last Jank Tank, and yeah, it does things. It just has to have the right things in the right order. If it doesn't have something to digivolve one of its stacks into, it doesn't do anything. It won't move forward. So Jank Tier is right where you belong. Next is Malomyotismon, which even with the new support has found its way into Jank Tier, which is interesting because I think it has managed to top elsewhere. But to be fair, maybe it's because of the fact I need to make sure it's the most up-to-date card image for the deck. So like maybe if I'd put the BT16 one up here, more people would have voted it higher. Who knows? But it's in Jank Tier. The deck as a whole is in Jank Tier. Let's find out let's see what we're gonna do. Let's see. Next is Cherubimon, so kind of the Alliance Bunnies, which is really interesting that we've got one version of Bunnies is tier 1.5 and the other version of Bunnies is bottom of the barrel. But you know, it can still do some really cool things. It can play things out. It's got the Ace coming its way in EX6. I think it'll do some really interesting things. Not necessarily good things, but interesting. Next, we've got is it Shakamon? I can't remember. Buddha, if it was a Digimon, is basically how I describe this. Buddha, if it was a Digimon, does a lot of security minus effects. Possibly does lots of DP reduction stuff. You know, very interesting mechanics with the cross stuff. You know, you cross 4 level 5s to make a level 7. That's really cool. Will be interested to see how this goes. I might even make this for Jank Tank because I was potentially looking to build this deck purely because I don't actually have a deck that does cross. I'm too much of a adventure boomer, so I haven't done that. But who knows? It might do well in Jank Tank. It might not. Next is Gabubond. Gabubond in the same vein of Ogubond, but not so much. Kind of suffers from old card syndrome. But we'll be getting some support in the near future, and we'll be looking to take some names. Next up is Aegistramon, which really split vote on this to whether it's Rogue Tier or Jank Tier, but ultimately fell into the Jank tier. I think something you got to remember for Jank Tank specifically is not only is Zudamon as a deck banned because it's in Rogue tier, but Zudamon as a card is banned. It's actually one of the very few ban list cards we have in the format, so you can't actually shit it out in Aegis-Dramon. I'm not even too sure if Aegis-Dramon could shit it out, but I don't know. Aegis-Dramon's poo. Enough said. Imperial Dramon, so very split vote here, because this can use a lot of the new Imperial Dramon stuff, but ultimately this has still fallen into Jank tier, and I am scared. I'm very scared of that being in Jank Tank. I genuinely think this could be the first BT16 EX6 format Jank Tank deck that gets banned, because I think it's going to be really, really strong. But I'll have to wait and see. Speaking of stuff that's surprisingly strong, we have Yellow Hybrid, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, when I mistakenly called Shine Greymon Red Hybrid, it can be really good. And it will be interesting to see how that is going to be in Jank Tank, if it's going to really take it away, if it's going to be kind of mid, I think it's going to lean more towards being really broken in Jank Tank, honestly, and could be on its way to getting banned. Next is a deck which comes out in BT16, Shroudmon. Shroudmon is super cool, love the design. Pulsemon is super cheeky, and I really love him, but ultimately the deck is kind of messy. All these kind of multicolour decks kind of are. They don't always know what they're doing. They're not very consistent, and it's something I'm looking to build, because that's apparently all the things I like. I think this belongs absolutely in Jank tier, and will be very, very cool to see in the near future once the suppliers get our stuff. Another deck which I was surprised to see made its way into Jank tier is Shoutmon. Shoutmon was the deck at one point back in kind of BT10, going on to BT12, that sort of era, and now it's in Jank tier and will probably make an appearance in Jank Tank at some point, so that's going to be kind of scary. I remember Shoutmon being super strong back in the day. Next is Dorbikmon, which I've kind of mistakenly put here to represent both Dorbikmon OTK and Dragon Links. It doesn't really represent both of those decks, but it is in Jank tier. It requires a lot of pieces for an OTK, and is kind of it'll be very interesting to see if it does a lot. It might not. It might do nothing, but we'll see. Next is Ultimate Chaosmon. I'll be honest, I don't know why I put this here. I don't know if it is a deck. I don't know if you could call it a deck. It does a lot of checks and it's big. We'll see. Next is Diabitmon, just shy of Rogue tier, and made its way into Jank tier. This is a deck that does some really cool stuff. The suspending stuff, the attacking over things, the unsuspends. I think it's just unfortunately needs a little bit more to get going than its other Ghost Game counterparts need, but will be interesting. And then the last deck, and this is another deck I'm super scared of in Jank Tank, Grandis Kuwagamon. Grandis is going to be a very interesting deck to see in Jank Tank. I mean, BT9 was the format I started on, and back then, Grandis was king. Like, Grandis was super, super strong. Since the banning of the limitation of the promo Gran, it's been slightly less potent, but it can utilize the Grand Kuwagamon Ace, which is going to be an interesting thing to see if that happens. But I think Charles is going to be bringing this. I have a feeling. This is the deck that Charles started with when we first started playing the game, and he could very well be looking at trying to take a Jank Tank championship with this deck. But that is our BT16 EX6 tier list for the Jank Tank format. and the meta in general kind of fused together in a big hour-long video. Sorry it's so long, guys. I've definitely been waffling for a long time. Like, subscribe, and ding that notification bell if you like this content. And apologies for any coughing I may have done. I will try and cut out as much of that as possible. I am just on death's door, apparently, and I am going to bed. But I will see you guys on the next one. Keep it digital.